Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final and fourth day of Delivery Week. Really appreciate you being here, and I see so many familiar names popping up in the participant window too. Thank you to so many of you for being here for every single one. My name is Anna Tausen. I'm the Chief Revenue and Innovation Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association, and we've put together this week of education and idea sharing for you, for our TRA members and non-members who are really just members that don't know it yet. So this one is really exciting actually because there's some breaking news that Kelsey gets to share with you guys on this, and I'm really thrilled to have our partners from Uber Eats and DoorDash with us as well. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get going. You can ask questions throughout. Use the Q&A window down below or the chat window in your right or left, depending on which setup you have. We're also live on Facebook right now, so for you Facebook users, we're also monitoring that area too. So if you ask questions in the comment area, we'll make sure that Kelsey or one of our panelists see it. I think that's it. So I guess I'll turn it over to Kelsey Erickson-Streufert, our Vice President of Government Affairs and Advocacy. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks, Anna. And I'll give our two panelists a chance to introduce themselves in a second. But again, my name is Kelsey Erickson-Streufert. I'm our Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy. And really, I oversee everything having to do with public policy for the Restaurant Association. So local issues, federal issues, and then of course, a major focus on state issues because the Texas Legislature is in session. So we're going to get into what that means and why that's relevant for the third-party delivery conversation in a minute. But first, I want to give our two panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And before I do that, I just have to say a huge thank you to them. It's kind of unorthodox to have different stakeholders get together like this and talk about a bill while it's in progress at the Texas Capitol. But I think the fact that our partners are willing to do this with us today just really speaks to the level of cooperation and kind of teamwork and camaraderie that we've developed over the past few months. So big thanks to them, and I'll turn it over. Chris, I'll turn it over to you first to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kelsey. Hey, everyone. Chris Miller, Public Policy Manager of Texas for Uber Technologies, Inc. Started with them back in 2015. I'm originally from the Beaumont, Port Arthur area of Texas. Moved to Austin the old-fashioned way, came to school and never left, as you can see from some of the paraphernalia behind me, big Longhorn like Kelsey. Also super excited to be serving on the TRA board this year. I think, I've met a lot of folks on here at the board meeting a couple weeks ago. What an amazing group, what an amazing organization. And just like Kelsey said, I'm just so thankful to be working with the leadership team here, Kelsey and Emily. It really is a testament, Kelsey, to the work that y'all have been doing, not since session has started, but for months leading up since the beginning of the pandemic, to see your legislative agenda and package moving so quickly, just really a testament. So really looking forward to connecting, taking questions, and talking through a lot of this stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to my good friend Alexi at the other food delivery company.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. My name's Alexi Madden, and I'm do government relations for DoorDash. I'm super happy to be here, and thank you to Kelsey for the invitation. So I'm fairly new to DoorDash. I've only been there for a couple of months so far, but I can say that everyone has been welcoming. Even our brutal competitor over there with his Longhorn paraphernalia has been the kindest and nicest. And Kelsey and her team have been wonderful to work with so far. I can say I've been doing legislation work for a long time now, and this has been one of the better experiences I've had. So very happy to see everyone here today. If you have any questions, obviously throw them in the chat for us, but I'll let Kelsey get started.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, anyone watching on Facebook or Zoom, please send us questions and we'll get to those as we go. So first, let's just kind of set the stage. As I mentioned, we're in the middle, really, of the legislative session. And for those watching who are less familiar with the crazy process we call the legislative session, it only lasts for 140 days every other year. So it's really a very narrow window to get a lot of things done. And just for some context, I looked, and just yesterday there were 640 some odd bills filed at the Texas Capitol, and that was just in one day. So huge scope, tons of issues that get filed every session, and very few actually make it to the end of the legislative process and become law. It's something like 20% in a normal session. And of course, this session is anything but normal because we have a little thing called the pandemic we're dealing with. And then there was also a huge failure of our electric grid. So our legislators really have their hands full, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a big agenda. As Chris kind of alluded to, the Texas Restaurant Association came in hot this session. We had a lot of issues that we needed to tackle because we have really faced an incredibly difficult year, and we need our state and our state leaders to step up and help. And one of the biggest ways that they can do that is helping us with our third-party delivery legislation. So we'll get into kind of the substance of it and where things stand. But first, we do have a big announcement, as Anna mentioned earlier. Just an hour or so ago, the Senate Business and Commerce Committee posted its schedule for its next hearing, which will be this upcoming Tuesday morning. And our bill was slated for that hearing. So that's really exciting. And it's really just exactly the news we wanted. This session is promising to be really difficult and hard to predict. And so the sooner we can get our bill done through the process, signed, sealed, and delivered, the better. So that is really exciting. But let's back up a little bit and just kind of talk about how we got to this point. How did we get to this bill? And why were we able to kind of come together as third-party delivery companies who are competitors within them, between themselves, and restaurants who need more third-party options? So Alexi, I'll start with you this time. Give us a little background. How did we get here? Why was this an initiative that DoorDash was willing to take on and kind of negotiate with the Restaurant Association to find some common ground?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, the short answer is COVID, right? COVID has brought third-party delivery to the forefront of the discussion as states had shutdowns for their restaurants. Everyone was being very careful, limiting indoor capacity. I think restaurants relied more on third-party delivery. And just a lot of things came to everybody's attention during COVID, even ourselves. One of the things that I will say is that from DoorDash's perspective, we heard from many small mom and pop type restaurants about how they didn't have a web presence, and it was hard to have delivery because of it. And so we even rolled out new products because of COVID and the lessons that we learned through it, that could maybe help the smaller restaurants at a lower level or whatnot. But that being said, when the TRA came to us and said, we would like to run a piece of legislation that clarifies what can and cannot happen through third-party delivery apps, we were on board for it. The more clarification that we can have, I think the better. Helps us be better operators to treat our merchant partners in a better way. And there was some tough issues and tough conversations that we had to have throughout these negotiations, but overall, from DoorDash's perspective, we're very pleased with where everything landed.
Awesome. Chris, give us your take. How did we get here? Why was this something Uber Eats was willing to take on?
Yeah, to echo Alexi's point, COVID accelerated everything. I think we were on this timeline over the next couple of years. Obviously, COVID accelerated it. I think what we saw, and Alexi touched on this, is what you had was a lot of states and cities, and I'm telling Noah about the flood here, but shutting down the restaurants and then trying to course correct by then trying these different sort of piecemeal regulations on third party without engaging feedback from stakeholders. And I think why we were so willing to engage in this is because as we see this, there's really two major stakeholders in this process. There's the restaurants, and then there's the third-party delivery. And like a lot of things, we just needed to get in a room, have a discussion. What I appreciate more than anything was the open dialogue and the ability to have a conversation. Is it a bill that everybody gets what they want? No. Is it a bill where there's something in there for everybody and it moves the ball forward? Yes. And I think that's really a good sign of good policy and good legislation. So excited to where we go. I don't cover as many states as my colleague Alexi, but I cover more than a handful. And in talking to different restaurant associations there, they're already hearing about this bill. They're bringing it up proactively. National Restaurant Association is talking about this bill, which just as a Texan, all the pride in the world. And I think that comes from, our willingness to sit down and hash out differences in a cordial manner. Because if we weren't on alignment on this, I genuinely don't think this bill, either side of this party could stop any version of this bill. And so the fact that we're together on this and we have something that works for the industry as a whole, I'm really proud of.
I love that. And just from the Restaurant Association perspective, we came at this issue this session with a few things in mind, right? One, as Chris said, we knew this was going to be a difficult session to pass any kind of contentious or controversial legislation, right? The session really is designed to kill bills, not to pass them. And that's in normal good times, much less kind of COVID electricity difficulty times. So we knew we wanted to come to the table with something that really had a strong chance of passing and that had support from a whole diverse set of stakeholders. And at the same time, we of course needed to protect our restaurant members and non-members of TRA I like what Anna said earlier, future members of TRA, that's what I'm gonna start calling them. And for us, and Emily talks about this a lot, delivery is part of the model moving forward. There's just no denying that. Even before COVID hit, delivery and takeout options were growing in popularity. And with COVID, that really just accelerated. And so for us, it was about how do we educate our restaurants and how do we get them a seat at the table so they can protect their interests. And we can essentially grow the pie for everyone so that everyone benefits. So Chris, with that background in mind, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, but how does the approach that we've taken in Texas with this bill, how does it differ from what Uber has seen in other cities and states, particularly during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, and I think early on in COVID, y'all saw it first with the shutdown of your restaurants. I mean, how many folks on this call were consulted about your businesses and your livelihoods being shut down? And then I think when it came to regulation, you saw a similar approach, no reaching out, no, and I get it. Look, trying times, a pandemic, a lot of moving parts, but like I said, it's really been the collaboration on this approach. I think the willingness to sit down, talk, and not only that, but Chairman Hancock, y'all been talking to him since day one, leadership in the House, and through that, y'all already had this dialogue. We were talking as well. And I think we got a lot of encouragement to get together, try to work something out that works for everyone. At the end of the day, it has to work for us. It has to work for the restaurants, but it also has to work for our shared end-use customer, right? At the end of the day, that's the one thing we will always have in common. And so this approach has been, let's throw some things out there, see what works, see what we can do, because this bill would not, again, I hate to harp on this would not be a bill if we hadn't done all of the legwork months before. And you're just not seeing that in other states. You're not seeing the proactive nature. You're not seeing the willingness to collaborate. And so that's a lot of credit to TRA.
Thank you. Alexi, what about y'all? How does this approach differ from what you're seeing in other cities and states?
Yeah, so I think Chris kind of hits the nail on the head. You guys were super proactive. You knew what you wanted and you came after it and said, these are the things that are very important to us and things that have to be in the bill. So I applaud you all for that. I would say, so I cover about 22 states and we're seeing variations of this bill, but none of them have been as strong as Texas. I think that some of the provisions in the bill, you guys talk about, being able to clearly state our terms and conditions in our terms and services documents to make it clear what restaurants are signing up for. I think that was a solid addition to the bill to make sure that, upon entry onto our platforms. I think with COVID, there was a lot of like, I'm going to do this because I have to do it to save my business. And now that we have you on these platforms, we want to keep you and we want to be good partners with y'all. So to that end, I think that some of the provisions in the bill are great. They're great for restaurants, and they're things that encourage transparency from our businesses. And so that's something I think that you should be very proud of in this bill, and that we're happy to partner with you on it.
Well, that is a great segue to actually finally get into some of the nuts and bolts of the bill. For everyone watching, we have negotiated this bill for, as we've said, for months. It's gone through, I don't even know how many versions. I'm sure Alexi and Chris are tired of seeing different versions. But we have finally all come together with what's called a committee substitute, which is essentially, an updated draft of the bill that Chairman Hancock will introduce on Tuesday when it is heard in committee. And so I'm going to just kind of highlight some of the provisions in that committee substitute that the third-party companies have been so great to negotiate with us and kind of come on board with. So one of the first things deals with trademark infringement. We have seen some examples of restaurants, even crazy things like whole websites being set up that look like they belong to the restaurant when actually a third party is setting them up separately. So we address that by prohibiting a third-party delivery service from using a restaurant's trademarks in a misleading way to suggest the restaurant sponsors or endorses the service. And it's really that sponsorship and endorsement language that's key. I am not a trademark attorney, but I think we all recognize that logos and menus and things like that are used by a variety of platforms, right? Google searches, Yelp, Uber and DoorDash, right? And so it's not about prohibiting all of that activity. It's about prohibiting the misleading use of it, right? So that was a great way to address that issue without getting into kind of unintended consequences of trademark law that none of us are experts in. At least I'm not. Shouldn't speak for the other panelists on this event. The next thing is the bill prohibits third-party delivery services from charging a restaurant any fees unless they are agreed to by the restaurant in writing. And that really speaks to something Alexi said earlier about the transparency and restaurants really understanding what it is that they're agreeing to from the get-go, right? So that there aren't surprises down the road, hidden fees, misunderstandings, right? We're trying to really get out in front of that from the get-go. And then also the bill requires third-party delivery services to remove a restaurant from their services within 10 days of receiving a request for removal, assuming that restaurant doesn't already have some kind of contract with the company, right? So this really speaks to, what's the non-partnered restaurant situation, which we can get into in a little bit. But again, just putting the restaurant back in the driver's seat. So if, maybe their food really doesn't transport very well for delivery, or maybe the restaurant has just decided that delivery is not going to be part of their business model for whatever reason. So making sure that they have that opportunity to essentially opt out of a delivery service. The next piece requires third-party delivery services to provide consumers a clearly identified mechanism to express concerns with an order directly to the delivery service. This is really about that customer end user experience, right? I know this has been talked about this whole week with our third-party partners. But we all succeed when the end user, the customer, has a good experience. And so the more resources and accessibility we can give to that consumer to address any issues if they come up, the better for all of us. And then lastly, the bill also prohibits third-party delivery services from shifting liability to a restaurant for harm caused by the third-party delivery service or its agents or employees. So this really is just, I'm responsible for the things I do, you're responsible for the things you do, right? Kind of straightforward. Alexi, Chris, any provisions in there that y'all want to talk about specifically or address?
I think you covered them. I mean, that was it. I mean, I think, it it sounds easier than I think, you know, watching the sausage get made. But it was some good conversations, a good back and forth. But what it forces folks to do is ask the question, why? You know, why do you want this? Why do you need this? Why? And I think in that process, I know I understood a lot more the pain points for restaurants, and hopefully some of that came across with our business practice, because I think transparency is the key. The more you know about our business, the better off we are. The more we know about your business, the better off we are. So I think you did a good job on covering the points.
Alexi, anything in there you want to highlight?
No, for sure. I would add to that. I would say, you know, Chris and I both know that without restaurants, we don't have platforms, right? Like, you guys are our merchant partners for a reason, right? So we want to do right by you. We want to make sure that, you know what you're getting into when you sign up for one of our services, how they work, to the best of your ability. I mean, you may not know exactly all the ins and outs, but you understand the basic premise. To Kelsey's point, what's required of you, what's required of us, how the partnership comes together back and forth, and what we can do in situations where they may not be working out, or whatever the case may be. So I think that, to Chris's earlier point as well, like, is the bill perfect? No. Is the bill, a win for one side of the coin? No, but that's what a good negotiation is. Everyone walks away a little wanting more. But for the most part, I think that how we came together, and the points that Kelsey articulated earlier, like, these are big wins. They're big wins for everybody. And the more clear and transparent that everyone can be, especially us, I think that makes for a better environment in the third-party delivery platforms and a better experience for everybody.
I completely agree. And one of the things I like about the bill is it really kind of fosters cooperation, right? This third-party delivery is going to work so much better for restaurants, for third-party companies, for drivers, for the consumer, if there's good coordination and communication between all of those different pieces, right? And I think that's what a lot of the bill's provisions are really after, right? If you want to charge a restaurant a fee, great, just make sure you talk to them about it beforehand and there's agreement on what that fee is going to be and why, right? And so by creating that buy-in from all the parties at the outset, I think there's such a great opportunity for this model to really grow and benefit all sides of the coin. And at the same time, it's still, this is Texas. We are a, light-handed touch in terms of regulation. We generally like to let private parties, private businesses negotiate their own business arrangements without too much interference from the state. And so we were respectful of that, I think, in this bill, and it is a lighter touch, or I won't even say lighter. It's a scalpel approach, right? Instead of the hammer. We sort of looked at what are the specific pain points, to Chris's point earlier, and how do we address those with an eye towards more competition, more choice, and that sort of letting the market work as it was intended. So I don't know, Chris or Alexi, if y'all have any thoughts on that. I just summarized it so well, they're speechless.
Yeah, no, you really did. but again, the point that I'll continue to belabor is, had we not done this legwork, there is not a chance a bill would pass this session on third-party delivery, one way or the other. I mean, it is just, and I know we touched on it, but it's anything but a normal session right now. And again, this has been anything but a normal year. But I feel confident in the ability to get this done. For those who were able to see on Wednesday, Alcohol to Go, House Bill 1024 by Chairman Guerin, wow, like, gets laid out. One person testifies, which is Emily. Emily gets complimented on how well she testifies, and then they move the bill out unanimously. I mean, it was just something special, and that doesn't happen just out of sympathy or anything like that. This bill's been worked for months behind the scenes, and I'm glad we were able to do that process here.
And actually, Chris, I'm glad you brought up that bill, because that's another place where restaurants and third-party delivery really both stand a lot to gain and can both work together. And so for those watching, that's the bill that makes permanent Governor Abbott's temporary waiver, which lets us do beer, wine, and cocktails for pickup and for delivery. It builds on a bill that was passed by Chairman Hancock last session for alcohol delivery. But the big change in this bill is restaurants can mix their own cocktails, seal them, and send those out with to-go orders. That's another, just again, a great opportunity for all of our organizations to work together and grow the pie for everyone. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Hopefully, knock on wood, this bill, 911, will move just as quickly as alcohol to go, because that was about as good a hearing as you can ask for. Let's talk about affordability a little bit. I know this has come up on the panels earlier in the week. That's probably the number one thing we hear from restaurants is just, we need delivery, we need to take advantage of third party, but we struggle to afford it because our margins are kind of so small from the jump. And obviously, lots of cities and states across the nation have looked at fee caps or, some way to kind of control the pricing and in theory, make things more affordable for restaurants. But we know it doesn't always work that way. We obviously did not take that approach in this bill. We felt strongly that we need to try to give the market a chance to really work and take more of that scalpel approach. But I wanted to give our two delivery partners a chance to kind of address affordability and, do you think we're still addressing that topic in this bill, even though we didn't go the route of, say, a fee cap or something like that?
I'll go first. In short, yes, I do, because I think ultimately what this bill does is gives restaurants a better seat at the table when it comes to food delivery, to kind of be more in control than they have been previously, with the ability to opt out of platforms. Because at the end of the day, it's a negotiation like any business, like a restaurant has with any other vendor or any other supplier they work with. And it's creating that level playing field. So when we come in and say, well, this is what we'd like to offer, we say, well, that doesn't work for me and I'd like to offer this. And I think doing that by really, this bill, what it does is it incents everyone to have a contract, for everyone to be working together. And then that's when the beauty of competition comes in and say, okay, well, I talked to, Grubhub, I've talked to DoorDash, and this, and you leverage those opportunities. So I do think that bill will help address that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing that I can say is, speaking specifically to fee caps sound to a restaurant like the ultimate idea, right? Like, I have to pay them less money, check. What goes unsaid, though, is that there's a cost to delivery, right? And so when you put a fee cap on, you make the third-party delivery fees absorb the cost, which, again, sounds like a great idea, but it doesn't really work that way when you start getting into the operations of it. If restaurants were told you can't charge more than $5 for a chicken sandwich, like, that might start being an issue, right? So you have to consider companies' costs, but also I think, and more importantly, is that it would hinder choice. So we at DoorDash, we offer different levels of commissions. And when you do that, you may opt into some of our marketing services. You may opt into placement services. When you put a fee cap on, you take all of that away. It gives us a strict commission to operate on. And that, again, it prohibits restaurants from being able to choose the type of service that they want from us. And I think it ultimately, while, people look at the dollars and cents of a fee cap, it takes away a lot of the added benefits that restaurants receive from our platforms and may not even be considered when legislators are trying to run these bills on the quick. And so that's kind of the conversations that we've been having everywhere, is like, it sounds good and it sounds like it can be helpful, but it is actually, harmful in these different ways. So I'm glad that Texas didn't take this approach, because we know that one of the very founding values of Texas is choice to do whatever you want, choice to make the decisions you need to make. And to Chris's point, like the value of business, you can leverage your conversations against us, you know, to try and work what works best for you and to choose which provider you feel best working with.
I think that's such an important point, Alexi. You know, one of the things we kept coming back to in this bill, and one of the things that Chairman Hancock's office was so good at kind of keeping as the focus was competition, right? How do we have more choices, not fewer? How do we have more options, including the opt-out, right? For some restaurants, delivery just isn't going to work, no matter how you slice it, no matter what rate you offer, it's just not in their business model. And that should be a choice, but so too should the Cadillac of plans, I'll call it, where you get all kinds of marketing and other services as well. And I think what's exciting about, you know, working on issues like this is it's emerging technology, right? We have these new tech companies, well, not new, but newish relative to, you know, other companies, come up with a cool, innovative idea that people love, right? People love the convenience of getting something delivered to their home any time of day, any kind of cuisine. So it's a new, exciting idea. And now it's sort of evolving and growing, and there's competition and there's new entrants into the market. So we want to encourage that, not stifle that. And I think we've really tried to keep the bill focused on that concept. Okay, everyone watching, if you have any questions, submit them. Y'all are very quiet. It's Friday. I guess everyone is, you know, already hitting happy hour or whatever, which I get. No judgment. Another question for our panelists here. Let's talk about regulatory certainty. I know that's a big piece of the bill for y'all as operators. The bill does a couple things on regulatory certainty. One is it says local governments, so cities and counties, cannot enforce local regulations to the extent that they conflict with the contractual terms that third-party companies and restaurants negotiate and agree to amongst themselves. The second thing is we deal with sort of the health and safety training aspect of it. And we say that the state is going to essentially adopt a very short, simple training program as the standard for the state. It would still be optional, but it would also prevent local governments from kind of coming up with their own version and requirements on that point. So talk to us about that. Why is that important for your companies? And why does that help us kind of grow and improve this market in Texas?
I'll go first again as kind of the poster child for local preemption in the state of Texas over the years. We're not against local control at all. And I think the fundamental question you have to ask is, what is the most local authority? And for this, I firmly believe it is the state. I mean, you know, for folks in the major cities like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, a lot of your deliveries go to adjacent municipalities that are right over. And so when you start to see that happen, like we did in our core rides business, you know, back in 2016, 2017, we were working on a statewide bill for rideshare regulations. One of the most convincing statistics is in 2016, 26% of our trips started and ended in a different city, right? Which speaks to the nature of statewide regulation. With that regulation, you're able to have business certainty, and business certainty is important for us like it is for you, so you can make those investments and you're not having to worry about potential changes that would hinder these investments before they bear fruit. So I think that's very important, especially with the delivery standards, with the deliveries. What are we calling them, Kelsey?
The safety training, the food handler training. Yeah.
It makes very little sense for a restaurant that sits on, you know, for a restaurant in Austin to have to do Buda food safety training, Westlake food safety training, Austin food like training, Round Rock food safety training, because you'll be delivering to all of these localities. So it makes a lot of sense, and hopefully we'll able to allow both industries to invest more heavily.
Absolutely. In fact, the language that we modeled for the safety training language, I think Senator Hancock got it passed, but it basically did the same thing for restaurants. So that, because what was happening is you had a statewide course, but then the local health authorities were saying, you actually need to pay us a fee locally, so we recognize your statewide course, right? And so all of these sort of waiters and food handlers were having to pay these different fees all across the state, when, you know, newsflash, safe food handling in Austin works the same way as it does in Houston or Lubbock. So that's a great point. Alexi, why is that? Why are those provisions important to DoorDash and helpful for y'all?
Yeah, for sure. So I think at a very base level, it's easier for us to work with, right? We call it the patchwork quilt of regulations. And typically we're talking about state to state, but once municipalities get involved as well, like to your point, like Lubbock is doing it completely different than San Antonio, which is doing it different than El Paso. So it gets to be onerous, and it's onerous for the restaurants, it's onerous for us. So I think that in doing so, there's a commonality. No matter where you go, the regulations are the same. We know what to expect. You guys know what to expect, and it can't be in a situation where in Lubbock we don't have to be transparent, you know, because it's not a statewide bill, you know. So I do think that the protections are better at the state level. It's just, you know, for those of you who own restaurants with maybe a couple of locations, like as we all know, maybe you own one in Austin and then maybe you do own one in Buda, like, and they're totally different regulations. It can be super challenging. So I think by doing it at the state level, we know what to expect no matter where we are anywhere in Texas.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I like to remind people about this too is, you know, our city councils and county commissioner courts are meeting, sometimes it feels like 365 days a year, right? So local regulations are constantly changing, hundreds of different jurisdictions. So, you know, staying on top of all of that when you're trying to run a business, particularly a national business like Uber Eats and DoorDash, it's just impossible. So, you know, regulatory consistency and certainty is something we really champion for regulations that apply to restaurants. And so it certainly makes sense that we would look at that for third-party delivery too. Okay, lastly, unless I get some late breaking questions from our viewers, let's talk about what's next. So we know we have this hearing on Tuesday morning. And then of course, just kind of quick summary of the process. Bill needs to go through and be voted out of committee. Then it will go to the Senate floor. If all of that is successful, it will then go to the House, where it basically has to repeat the same process. Go to House committee, go to House calendars committee, which is kind of an extra step, and then go to the House floor. So we still have several kind of pieces left, but time to get it done. So Alexi, I'll start with you this time. We'll change up the order. What do you think we should expect next, and how do we get this over the line?
Great question. How do we get this over the line? We get this over the line with the help of everybody involved, right? I think showing that we have worked together on this bill, that it is a collaborative effort, that, you know, it does great things for restaurants. It holds third-party delivery to the line, you know, and is very transparent in what it does and what services that we can provide. I think that, you know, to the extent you can call your senator and encourage them to vote yes on the bill, I think that's what we should all be doing, right?
Perfect.
I agree with that. And the only thing I would say is I think Kelsey has a pretty good strategy for that House Calendars Committee when we get there. If you want to share that with everybody.
So our House author is the chairman of the House Calendars Committee. So that, you might notice there's a theme of chairman involved, and that is certainly not on accident. We're very, very grateful that Chairman Hancock and Chairman Burrows filed this bill and really took the time to understand, you know, what the issue was and why it was important amongst all of the other things happening in Texas right now.
Yeah, and sorry, was someone else coming in? Don't sell yourself short on that, Kelsey. It's not easy to get a chairman to carry your bill, and you showed them good bills, but I think it also speaks as the industry as a whole, the great job y'all have done over the last year, where these important chairmen and members of the legislature understand they need to be on the forefront helping restaurants, and it's time. And I think the biggest thing is this is part 2 of 6 parts, right? This is how big is the legislative agenda?
I think that's about right. Yep.
We're not stopping here. I mean, this is, and so when they try to pat us on the back and tell us, good job and all that, I think the other things we got a few more bills to go. Since I've got you here, let me talk to you about these other bills.
That's exactly right. We were laughing before we started that one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten for lobbying is when you get yes, stop talking, right? So it's like, this one's in great shape, we need a yes, and then we'll move right on to the next thing. That's exactly right. All right, well, I think that's all the questions we had prepared. Alexi, Chris, I'll give you all a chance to kind of sum anything up, anything that I've missed, and then we'll sign us off a little early and everyone can get back to happy hour. Order your cocktails to go right now, so they'll be delivered when you're done.
That is correct. Sounds like a plan. No, it's just been a real pleasure to work with the Texas Restaurant Association. You guys have made things as collaborative as possible. I know I sound like a broken record, but sincerely, like, this has been one of the better experiences that I've had in negotiating with, what was technically an opponent. But we've just had a really pleasant experience here. We're happy to continue working together and for years to come. And, to the extent we can continue to be helpful, you know who to call.
Yeah, same thing. Really want to continue moving the ball forward. Like we've all touched on, we're partners at the end of the day. We don't grow unless y'all grow, and hopefully we can play a part in restaurants' growth going forward. So full open door transparency. Would love to work and talk through each one of you. Like I said, I'm sitting on the board. All of my contact information is on there. We have a great team dedicated to Texas. We'd be happy to connect you with the right folks. When DoorDash gives you an offer, you call us. We'll give you an offer. Good healthy competition. So
nice plug. Nice plug.
Hey, come on. So really, really great to be working with everyone, and excited to see what the future holds for all of us.
Absolutely. And this is just such a great way to kind of wrap up Delivery Week, because I think, we've focused on the legislation we're all working on, but it's all these pieces together, right? And that's what's exciting is we went from not really talking to third-party delivery companies much as an organization to working on 2 bills with y'all, rolling out the discount preferred partner stuff yesterday, ensuring that our members have points of contact at your companies to troubleshoot and make sure, if things go wrong, they know who to talk with. We've worked together on, restaurant relief fund and traction, fundraising. I mean, the list goes on. And I really think it's just the beginning. We're all stronger when we're working together. And so it's exciting. It's exciting to kind of kick off this relationship, if you will, with some really important kind of wins right in front of us that we can realize. So with that really optimistic note, I think I'll sign us off. So thank you to everyone for watching, and everyone have a great weekend, and let's have a strong weekend of sales for all of us. Everyone take care.